Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion, Racial Equity in Business, How to Get Results by Being Color Brave, presented by Bank of America. I'm Rhonda Pringle, Market President and Publisher of the Baltimore Business Journal. 2020 is a historic year for a number of reasons, and one of them is how we as a country are addressing race and equity. Let's be honest, conversations like this have been had before. What I'm hopeful about is that the frequency and the intensity of these discussions feels different. More importantly, there is an urgency that I think we all need to seize in this moment to make real change happen. If we want progress, the conversation has to turn into action that elevates this notion of moving from colorblind within our organizations to really being color brave. And we've gathered a tremendous panel to carry on this conversation today. You can download the panel bios in the handout section of the control panel. And now, I'd like to introduce Sabina Kelly, Greater Maryland Market President, representing sponsor Bank of America, who will lead this discussion. We're so excited to have you and to have Bank of America partnering with the Baltimore Business Journal on this panel discussion today. How are you?
I am great. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I haven't seen you in such a long time.
It's great. We are eager to learn from you and the rest of the panel about how we can start to change the conversation into an actionable plan of how we make a difference in the practices of the business world and how we can implement these in our organization to help create a more diverse leadership for the future. So what makes this conversation different, what I'm most excited about, is the action part. We spend a lot of conversation in our offices talking about how you make this change from just words on paper to something in your organization that really feels different. And so I'm really excited about this. Tell me a little bit more about why this conversation is important to Bank of America.
So Rhonda, thank you so much. I'm really just thrilled to be here with you and our panelists. This is an important topic for all of us in the business community. You know, at Bank of America, we firmly believe that all employees should be treated with respect, live free of discrimination, and be able to bring their whole selves to work. I mean, it's core to who we are, it's core to our values, and it is core to, you know, how we drive responsible growth. And we know that our teammates must reflect the diversity of our clients and communities that we serve, and that diversity makes us stronger. And the value we deliver as a company is strengthened by the broad perspectives that our colleagues bring together to meet the needs of our various and diverse stakeholders. You know, last year we introduced our Human Capital Management Report to provide greater clarity and transparency in how we make our company a great place to work and to support our teammates and their families. This report has helped our shareholders and other stakeholders better understand our employee practices, and it also serves as a baseline in which we can show the progress that we continue to make in supporting our teammates and those who serve our clients and communities every day. And so while in the top 3 levels of our company, we have more than 40% women and 20% of people of color, we have work to do. We know that on this journey. So I look forward to a rich discussion today with our esteemed panel.
Well, before you introduce the panelists, I am going to head off screen, get my front row seat to this anticipated conversation, and I'm going to see you after the discussion. So, you know, I'm looking forward to it.
Rhonda, it sounds good. Take your time getting to your seat. So joining me today are several panelists, the CEO and publisher of the Afro newspapers, Francis Tony Draper.
Good afternoon.
Tony, welcome. Yeah, good afternoon. Global Head of Diversity at McCormick & Company, Narita Nettie Perez. Nettie, welcome.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Under Armour, Jessica Rice. Welcome, Jessica.
Sabina, happy to be here.
And our final panelist, Vice President of Human Resources at Kaiser Permanente, Delinda Washington. Delinda, welcome.
Thank you, Sabrina. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you all for being here today. And so let's get started with the discussion. So I will pose questions. Some will be to all and some will be selectively to various of our panelists. So let's just plow in. Many companies put out mission statements in response to the killing of George Floyd and the subsequent national protests. What changes did your company make to support this mission? So can we start? So Tony, let me start with Tony.
So let me say at the Afro-American newspapers, for the 128 years that we've been in existence, we have always known that Black lives matter. And it's not that all lives don't matter, but that's our particular mission. But I think it was even heightened, if you will, by not just the killing of George Floyd, but so many before and so many since, that we shine, just a brighter spotlight on systemic structural racism issues and solutions. It's one thing to do journalism. We can report what's going on, but we really are focused in on solutions journalism. Now, what are the solutions to some of these so it does not keep happening? Because you can go back to the pages of the Afro, and we have reported on things like this year after year after year. And so it just reinforced our basic mission and certainly made us more in tune and aware of solutions-oriented journalism.
Tony, thank you very much. How about if we go to Jessica?
Great. First, I want to thank Bank of America and the BBJ for having this conversation. It's so important. So I'm glad we all could be here today. So I think related to the question, it's important to point out that Under Armour has had a solid diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy in place, certainly prior to May, and we've made significant progress. So we had a really great foundation to build from. However, with the murder of George Floyd, the ongoing racial inequity and social injustice, we knew that we needed to accelerate certain components of our strategy. So we publicly published our commitments to diversity and inclusion. Everyone can go take a look at them. They are out on our aboutua.com site. And we really made 12 commitments around where we were going to accelerate. And I certainly will not go through all 12, but let me give you a couple of the highlights. First, from a representation perspective, we committed by 2023 to have 30% of our director and above positions filled with underrepresented groups from a race and ethnicity perspective, with 12% of that 30 being Black talent. When we think about internal advancement, we did the same for our succession slate. So by 2023, 30% of our leadership successors will be from underrepresented groups, with 12% of that being Black talent. We also built in some additional accountability measures. So we are now tying the achievement of our diversity and inclusion goals to teammate and executive compensation. And we're also focused very heavily on teammate and leader training around making our environment more inclusive. So this is around topics of unconscious bias, anti-racism, and inclusive leadership practices. And then finally, because we have a big focus in the community, from a philanthropic perspective, we committed to multiple items, but mainly additional investment in Black-led organizations and organizations that are focused on programming around racial equity and social injustice. So that's just a snapshot of the work that we have accelerated around this topic.
Jessica, thank you. Delinda, can I turn this over to you?
Yes, thanks, Sabina. I appreciate Bank of America and the Baltimore Business Journal for really putting on and asking these tough questions. So I really appreciate the invitation. So from a Kaiser Permanente perspective, we have made sure that we've been invested in the community for years. Our investment really started in 2015 after the Freddie Gray situation, with a Baltimore barbershop initiative where we actually had Kaiser Permanente managers, physicians go into the barbershop to actually talk through the importance of health screenings and with local residents into the barbershops. And we also started a high school internship program really focused on getting some of the Baltimore high school students into healthcare careers, healthcare options, and showing them other ways from a career perspective. Now, after the George Floyd murder, Kaiser Permanente again doubled down on its commitment to the Baltimore community and communities of color, specifically African American communities. We actually set aside $60 million to invest in small businesses. We know that if small businesses are thriving within the African American community, then the community is also thriving and becomes healthier. In addition to the $60 million investment, we are also putting aside $25 million grants for grassroots efforts. If you notice within this current movement, there are a lot of grassroots efforts that are really focused myopically on the challenges within the African American community and the things that systematically, disproportionately impact the African American community from those grassroots efforts. So those are just some of the few things that Kaiser Permanente have done externally to help the community. Internally, we have also conducted listening sessions with our employees. Our employees are a part of the community as well, and we want to make sure that as we try to make sure we're helping and impacting in a positive way our community, we're also listening to our employees and improving our current environment within the Kaiser Permanente organization.
Hey, Delinda, thank you so much for that. This commitment to capital access is critical, as we know, and so really appreciate the work that you're doing in that regard. So Nettie, let me turn this over to you.
Well, thank you to Bank of America and the Business Journal for having this conversation, which is really critical, I think, especially right now and really going into the future as well, because the dialogue doesn't stop after today, right? So McCormick has been in the Baltimore area for a very long time. When we first made a decision to publicly address what was happening, we really thought through the fact that we already had a global diversity and inclusion strategy in place. And we saw that a lot of the protests were also taking place globally. So it wasn't just in the US, but we wanted to make sure that we were able to respond from a global perspective. So our CEO did make a statement publicly with the support of our executive management team and our board, as well as many of our senior leaders. And so that was one step that we took, but within that, we also made external commitments like my colleagues have shared, whether they be around workforce initiatives, work environment, and also external community facing. And I love the comment that Delinda made about making sure we were also investing in the small businesses and the communities that were being impacted. So we worked with our supplier diversity team to make sure that we were doing grants and providing resources that they had an opportunity to direct where best to use those dollars in the community. Beyond that, we did also focus internally. We immediately put out a statement, and that was the first thing we actually did, put out a statement to our employees to reassure them of our commitment to them, to their well-being, and to let them know that we were really concerned about making sure that they felt safe in the communities that they were in. And then we were fortunate that we were having our global town hall within about 4 days of when all of the events started happening. And so we were able to pivot very quickly and reach about 4,000 employees through our global town hall on diversity and inclusion. And then following that, we took time to really think about how we wanted to show up in the community, not just in the US and in the Baltimore area, but really from a global perspective. And then within that week, we put out a message from our CEO to respond to what was happening and reassure our employees of our commitment to Black Lives Movement and also to the diversity work that we had already put underway.
Nettie, it's really wonderful to have McCormick right here in our community and national headquarters. So really looking forward to partnering with all of you as we continue to go forth and help each other on our journey. So let me turn this over to Jessica and Tony. After the tragic death of Freddie Gray, there were a lot of conversations and a lot of pledges. Have we seen progress? And if not, how can we ensure that this moment is different than in 2015? So, Tony, can I turn it to you first?
Sure, Sabina, that's a great question. You know, crises usually push us into some response, you know, regardless of the crises, whether it is a protest or a statement. But the issue is deeper than that, because if we're reactionary, as we tend to be, I mean, that's just human nature. We react, and then things don't last as long. And so I think that the intentionality, and I probably use that word again in another conversation around, you know, diversity, but intentionality is so important in terms of what we intend to do is one thing, but following through with another thing, and then how we measure what we say we're going to do, so that it's not just a statement on our websites or a new program, but that we actually are looking deeper into what are the causes, what's been going on for years and years and years. How do we actually address things and make a difference that's going to last from, you know, beyond the incident. The Freddie Gray incident was certainly unfortunate, but so was the hosing of African Americans, you know, many, many years ago. And so we've got to really, I think, dig deeper underneath and understand, okay, what are the causes? How do we address those? Because we ask anybody, not anybody, that's not true, but we ask most people about being a racist, or all of us will say, I'm not, you know, nope, that's not me. I'm not a racist, and this is what I do, or this is what my company does. Yet when these things continue to happen, it says that we need to approach it a little differently in terms of how we frame it and how we understand it collectively. And that's the deep work, right? That takes a lot of time and effort and energy and commitment from the top levels of an organization all the way through.
Mm-hmm. And Tony, thank you for that. I mean, it really does, you know, it starts with our leaders and leadership. When you talk about where we are today, we have to really go back in history, well before our times, to really understand, and especially in Baltimore, how do we get where we are right now, and understanding that, and be willing to, like, be open to understanding that. So let me turn this over, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks, Sabina. So I agree with everything that Tony has said, and I actually have found myself saying in the recent months that this cannot be a moment, it needs to be a movement. And so when we think about a movement, what does that mean? And for me, what it means is we must have, like Tony said, clear and measurable goals that are really focused on sustained long-term change, and then that link to accountability, which is so important. And I'll probably say this multiple times throughout this panel, because I think it really is the key to progress and success, is how are you holding people accountable for making the change, whether that's an individual behavioral change or a process change or a program change. There's got to be accountability measures linked in, so we are inspecting what we expect. So again, we don't look 1 year out, 3 years out, 5 years out, and look back at the summer of 2020 and say, well, we did a lot of great work then, but nothing has changed. So it's really about those goals and accountability.
Jessica, thank you. My next question is going to go to Delinda, Nettie, and Jessica. You know, much of the focus on D&I initiatives have been focused on recruitment. How are you developing Black and Brown employees to take on leadership roles within your organizations? This is an important question. So Delinda, let me ask if you could kick us off here.
Sure. So at Kaiser Permanente, we've created a structure within our organization to help ensure that we are recruiting diverse individuals, right? Because we were trying to provide high quality, we are providing high quality, culturally competent, linguistically sensitive healthcare. And to do that, you have to make sure you have a diverse workforce. So within that diverse workforce, once we get them in as individual contributors, we have two specific programs that we really focus on. So first, our business resource groups, or BRGs. So we have BRGs offering sort of networking, mentoring, professional development opportunities to support our employees. So we have a business resource group for our Latinx population, our Black African American and African Caribbean population, our Asian population, and so on. And within these business resource groups, each of those business resource groups have mentors that are on the CEO panel, right? So they may have a mentor who is our CFO. Their mentor may be the head of HR, maybe me, and so on from a president panel standpoint. So they actually get that exposure to the leaders within our organization. And in addition, as we yearly sort of create our strategic plan for Kaiser Permanente, we actually engage our business resource groups. Right. We say, this is where we're headed as an organization. Provide us some feedback, provide us some information to help us continue to build our plan. And what we found out is a lot of times, they have great ideas depending on the business resource group. And it actually helps us deliver, again, high quality, competent, culturally competent care. So that's one structure. Our second structure is we have, it's called Kaiser Permanente Leadership University. And that is a structured program across Kaiser Permanente where we take our frontline leaders, assess their skills, and then we also provide specific training to make sure that we are providing coaching, training, and development for our leaders within Kaiser Permanente Leadership University, or KPLU, as we call it here. So it's important for us to have that upward mobility within our organization. It's important. It is also important to make sure that our leaders represent our frontline workforce.
So Delinda, that commitment you have from the leadership team to your diverse employees is, I think that's fantastic. That is fantastic. And what I also love that you do at Kaiser is you try to also recruit by starting with young people. And letting them know that there's a real career that they can have in healthcare. So just getting people to believe that they can be part of a healthcare career. So thank you for that. So let me turn this over to Nettie.
Sure. So I think similarly, we've got a pretty robust workforce talent recruitment strategy. And the good thing is that D&I is part of the conversations for talent acquisition, talent management, and talent development. And so I get the opportunity to partner with some really great colleagues at McCormick. Some of the things that we are doing is over the course of the last couple of years, started to build external partnerships, which we didn't have previously, with national organizations like the National Black MBAs, the Association of Latino Professionals in Finance and Accounting, so that we could make sure that we developed strategies to try and attract diverse talent. Aside from that, once you attract talent, there's a piece around retention. And so we developed a program called the US Ignite program, specifically for ethnically diverse talent. And these are individuals that we consider high potential, that are nominated through the HR organization, through business leaders, so that we could work with them through a learning program and make sure that we were providing them the skills that they need in order to grow to the next level of leadership at McCormick. Beyond that, we also leverage our employee ambassador groups. We call them EAGs and not ERGs or BRGs, but however we refer to them, I strongly believe that employee ambassador groups serve as a great resource for onboarding and helping individuals that come into an organization get acculturated to that environment, but then also help to continue to develop the skills that are necessary in order to grow in the organization. So right now, we're actually revisiting the structure of those EAGs and looking to align the work that they're doing more closely with our overall diversity and inclusion strategy, so that they're focused more on What are we doing around workforce environment? What are we doing in terms of overall work environment? And then what are we doing in the marketplace that has a link to community, but also how are the EAGs also helping us to better connect with our customers? So the piece that I focus on is really how are we leveraging those EAGs to help develop some of the skills that are needed in the organization to continue to grow through our workforce initiatives. And beyond that, we're very involved in looking at and tracking the success rate of our multiculturally diverse, ethnically diverse talent in the organization, as well as our women in terms of retention, succession planning, and overall development.
Nettie, thank you very much for that. It really ties back to what I heard from Tony earlier, which is the intentionality that has to be there for success. It has to be there. So Jessica, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So very similar to the other answers, and I've already spoken about our commitment around our leadership successors, and so we have a long-term goal, and that links into what Sabina, you just mentioned around the intentionality of it. So we have a proactive plan on how we will move teammates through the organization to help them progress in their careers. But then when we think of more formalized professional development, we've made some significant investment to develop a progressive curriculum that's designed to reach our teammates at each level of their career so they can continue to move up the career ladder. And for us specifically, for our Black and Brown teammates, we have selected a provider that is focused on the experience of Black professionals. We think that's important to bring some of that into the discussion. We happen to use the Executive Leadership Council, but there are a number of organizations that are very good in this space. So the professional development is really a cornerstone of the work that we're doing from an advancement perspective. And maybe the final thing that I would mention is, although not officially launched yet, we're getting there, is we are designing a mentoring program specifically for our underrepresented groups to really supplement that more formal professional development. So we have kind of a multi-pronged approach that we are focused on.
Thank you for that, Jessica. What I'm hearing from all of you that there are some great ideas, and I know that the other folks listening in are going to want to leverage, probably get in touch with you, but I'm learning when I'm listening to all the things that you're doing. So next question is a very, very important topic. And I'm going to ask Tony and Delinda to address this. There is a lack of progress in elevating Black people into C-level positions, even when the skills and experience are considerable. So what do you think is the biggest barrier? So Tony, let me ask you to speak to this first.
Well, Sabina, that's a big question.
It is.
Our panel's talking about that. And so we've already said about being intentional, but also really, I think, taking a look at the pipeline, looking at the pipeline to the C-suite, and I'm not saying always from the basement to the C-suite level, that kind of pipeline certainly works, but being intentional as to who we recruit, where they are in the pipeline, how they're mentored. I think you mentioned that, how people are mentored, not just mentored in the workplace. How are they mentored relationally? How are they mentored socially? And what is our pool? What pool are we pulling from? If we just pull from the pool of people that we know, that's the low-hanging fruit, right? Mm-hmm. Who do you know? Even though we recruit for these positions, we may do it far and wide, but we usually ask somebody, well, who do you know? And someone says, well, I know it's so-and-so. Well, a lot of times we know the people in our own circles.
Right.
And even if we do an executive search firm, if we're not real intentional about who it is that we're trying to recruit, we still get more people who are like us because that's where our comfort level is, right? And so it's really having that plan, I think, that all of these ladies have talked about, that says, this is what we're going to do. And so if we have a C-level position open, for example, we're going to make sure that there's a diverse pool of candidates. We're not even going to consider candidates unless certain benchmarks are achieved within that pool, right? And so we're going to say to the executive search firm or whomever, don't keep bringing us the same kind of people, and please don't tell us that you can't find anybody, because That's an insult.
It is an
There
insult.
it really is an
Yeah.
insult. So there are lots of people who are available, but it takes that intentionality, just over, I know that's kind of overworking that word, but it takes the intentionality of
Mhm.
really saying this is who we want.
Well,
In terms,
yeah,
yeah,
Tony, I think, yeah, I didn't mean to talk over you, but I think, your point is we as leaders, we need to demand that. That's not an option.
right. And then we also need to be public about who we have in the C-suite, who we have on our board of directors, right? We know the legislation was passed last year in Maryland where companies have to report on their Form 1s how many women they have on boards. And you can imagine the resistance to that legislation. It didn't say you had to put women on boards. We just said we're counting them. We're looking at how many. Can you tell us how many women you have? In California, they did the same thing. And now California does have a requirement for women on corporate boards, and you can see the numbers going up because, what gets measured, right? So
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think that's what has to happen. We have to measure, we have to be open about it, and we have to stop saying we can't find people.
Yeah. Tony, thank you. Delinda, let me ask you if you could address that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna absolutely agree with what everything Tony said. So from my perspective, the two biggest barriers is absolutely the lack of transparency, right? So the lack of transparency on what C-level positions are open. It's not like you can go on Indeed, LinkedIn to find, the C-level positions are open. And often when they're open, by the time you figure it out, it's already closed. And to Tony's point, the search firm has been selected and you were not considered a candidate because the transparency right now is pretty much opaque as it relates to actually filling C-suite positions. So to me, that's the first barrier. The second barrier is actually, proving that you can actually have the qualifications to do the C-level position job. And how do you prove that? And a lot of times, as Tony pointed out, it is who you know from a familiarity standpoint. And sometimes from a familiarity standpoint, if you have not expanded your network, it's very, very hard to navigate those choppy waters. As we all know, for publicly traded companies, shareholders have demands. The qualifications for C-level jobs keep changing because industries are changing, and being able to prove that you can do the job is a significant hurdle. From my perspective, my advice here at Kaiser Permanente, we're fortunate. Our previous CEO, Bernard Tyson, African American male, he pretty much started as an intern and rose to the ranks of our CEO within our organization. It is an amazing feat. And he will tell his story. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, but he would tell his story about how he had to outperform. He had to move to different parts of the United States to run different businesses within Kaiser Permanente. And as he grew into the ranks and became the CEO, he had a second in command, Greg Adams, who was also an African American male. So as you're lifted, you have to, and as you climb, you have to lift others up with you into these C-suite levels. So after Bernard Tyson passed, Greg Adams was able to again prove himself as he was second in command, met different challenges, and now he is our new president. Again, an African American male. So I do think it's important for us to make sure performance is there. As we climb into these positions, we look back and make sure we're finding the talent within our organization, and also in the community, whether it's people on school boards, whether it's individuals on nonprofit boards, that we're making intentionally connecting with the different talent within our communities to make sure that as these C-suite positions are open, that you can potentially recommend other individuals to the C-suite level positions. But the lack of transparency is the biggest barrier. And I just applaud the Maryland State Legislature and California for saying, hey, you know what, because it's so opaque, we're going to try to open the doors, open the screens, break the glass ceiling, because if you have to show it, then all of a sudden people start asking different questions. So, kudos to local governments for saying we're going to hold businesses accountable for that performance and the lack of diversity. So that's I just applaud our government for that. Echoing Tony's comments.
Yeah, Delinda, thank you for that. You said so much. I think what you're also, what I'm hearing is that for all of us as leaders, this work is full-time. We have to constantly be thinking about this. This is not when a position opens up. So let me turn this over to Tony and Nettie. This next question ties into all that we've just talked about and really getting people ready for that C-suite too. So we consistently hear that Black talented employees are hard to find. To your points you made earlier, Tony, that's not true, but it is said.
Mm-hmm.
What do companies need to do differently to attract and uncover the talent that we know exists? So it's Tony and Nettie will respond on this, but let me turn it to Tony first.
Okay, I think the first thing we have to do is change our conversation. So let me see if I can make it, give you an example. If I keep saying to a child that you don't behave, you don't behave well, you don't do well in school, you won't do well, you can't. If I keep repeating that narrative, then after a while I start believing it.
Mm-hmm.
If I watch The Wire, I think that's all of Baltimore. So I have to change my narrative and my thought pattern. And I have to learn how to say that there's nothing wrong with Black and brown people. So we have to get past, and a lot of times we don't want to deal with that. We don't want to deal with the underlying issues that manifest themselves. The outcome is one thing, right? But what's underneath of that? And so Black and brown people are not flawed. Black and brown people are educated. Black and brown people can do the job. We have to reorient our own selves culturally. Not everybody. These ladies on this panel, Sabina, progressive thinking, doing the work. But I'm talking about in general, what we get bombarded with, and so we can blame our industry, the media. What we get bombarded with sometimes are all the negative stereotypes, and that feeds into what you're talking about in terms of just finding the talent that we need. And so we have to start thinking, you know what, that talent is there. We should recruit. I know these companies probably do already on historically black college campuses. That is our norm. That is not our exception. And so that's what we do as a matter of practice. We have to either help to make our school system stronger, or take a look at what we're really doing and not just buy into the fact that the school systems are not producing who we need. And so I think some of it is mindset. Mm-hmm. and really going underneath of that and making a different kind of declaration, not as a fantasy, but actually based on fact. We certainly can. There are many talented young and not so young African Americans and other ethnicities who are ready. So I hope that answers the question. But I just think we have to reorient our own thinking around that. And for some of us, I forgot who said it on this panel, that you have an intentional training around race and equity and inclusion. We got to continue to do that. We have to bust the myths, if I can use that word, bust myths and stereotypes about what people bring and don't bring to a conversation or to a company.
Tony, thank you. We just have to call it out, and as leaders. So Nettie, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is an area that I'm super passionate about, especially having been in the diversity and inclusion space now and human resources space now for well over 28 years. So the way I look at it is that corporations, in particular, for us as D&I practitioners, those of us that have the opportunity and privilege to lead diversity and inclusion, but also those of us that are business leaders in our organizations, have to really think about how we go about attracting, developing, and retaining talent. And so when you think about how do we grow Black talent and or either ethnically diverse talent in the organization? We know that there are tons of studies out there that show the more diverse an organization is, the greater opportunity you have to positively impact productivity and the bottom line of the organization. That's a given. But we still have to address the systemic issues within our own organizations around HR practices that may be preventing individuals from successfully navigating the organization, whether it be in the recruiting process where we attract talent, and then as individuals come into the organization, how we onboard and develop that talent and grow that talent for succession. And so I always think about the fact that while I love the idea of mentorship, and I think that's important, to really get to the C-suite, the differentiator is really having a sponsor. And oftentimes the decision makers in corporations are white males. Even for the opportunity to advance white females or Black individuals or Hispanic individuals, the differentiator is, do you have an individual that is already in a position of power that is bringing you with them on their journey? And so looking for establishing and creating sponsorship opportunities and building relationships with individuals that are already in position of power. That's one element to help advance. I did look at the fact that only 3.2% of all leaders across the United States in executive positions are Black employees. That to me is really sad because we have an amazing amount of individuals that are talented and capable and are eager to make a difference in organizations. So when I look at the representation compared to the overall population, there's definitely a gap there. And I think it comes back to how are we looking at also providing the skill set to the hiring managers, not just the recruiters that are going out and selecting and preparing diverse slates, but the hiring managers that are making decisions. And I think this is where the conversations around unconscious bias and how they show up in the organization make a difference. So providing the training that's needed for hiring managers to look at themselves and how they're interpreting what are the skills they need compared to the availability of talent, and then asking them and holding them accountable for making sure that they're looking at diverse slates and not just a group of individuals that look like them. So that piece of asking the questions around the hiring slate, and then the same thing goes to how are we looking at promoting individuals. So is the slate of individuals being considered for promotion and advancement in the organization also diverse? And if it's not, then as an organization, you have to really take a deeper look at why not. And so holding, again, managers and leaders accountable for who are they grooming, how are they grooming individuals to be successful. And then looking at turnover rate is really critical as well. If you're investing in bringing in individuals into an organization and they're only staying 18 or 24 months and leaving, and it's disproportionate to the representation of what you're hiring and what you need to grow for that organization's future, then you have to be asking questions about what are we not doing? Why are we losing talent? We know in the US right now, 36% of small business owners and the fastest growing group of small business owners are Latinas. So my question is, why are they exiting corporate America to start their own businesses? Are they not seeing themselves in the corporate space? And I think we need to ask that same question with regards to Black talent in the US. Why are they exiting? For millennials, we know that they have a very high expectation and want to progress very quickly, and they're more likely to leave corporations at a quicker rate if they do not see the opportunities for progression or the investment in them in order to be able to continue to grow in the organization. So these are all really critical questions from a business perspective that we need to ask. And then the other part is from a business leadership perspective. If we have a high turnover rate, that is a hidden cost to the corporation. We know from studies at Deloitte and E&Y that for every person that's hired into an organization, you are potentially, if they're leaving the organization, they're potentially leaving about $150,000 or $60,000 on the table because you've just lost that talent. And that means that's the price that it would take to go out and recruit that talent, new talent in, develop that talent, invest in them for future growth. And if they leave the organization, you really have a lost leader in terms of the benefit to the organization. So I think we have a number of questions from an HR perspective, from an E&I perspective, from a business leadership perspective that we need to really look at in order to address the gaps. And is there talent out there? Most definitely. I would say if an organization is having a hard time finding talent, then they may not be looking for the right talent to begin with. And they may not be looking in the right places. And so these relationships with the Executive Leadership Council, the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, Ascend, and other organizations, whether it be early talent, mid-career talent, and executive talent, are really critical relationships to have in order to close those pipeline gaps when it comes to diverse talent.
Annette, thank you. You said so much and really, really rich conversation. So let me open the next question up to all of you. So as we move from the notion of being colorblind to color brave in a workplace, what does it mean to be color brave from your perspective? So Jessica, let me turn this over to you first.
Great, thanks, Sabina. Well, maybe I'll talk about this term colorblind just briefly because I think it's important to kind of set some context. So when we hear people say, I don't see color, I see everyone the same, aren't we all people? There's usually good intention behind some of those comments that you're trying to minimize difference or find commonality. But what it really does is it diminishes the unique experience that we bring as individuals based on our background. And so this color brave, this concept of color brave is really speaking openly and honestly, in this case about race, to better acknowledge and understand others' perspectives. And so even though it makes us uncomfortable, which is where the brave part comes in, it's really what is necessary for real change and real dialogue around this topic. I'm sure my fellow panelists have some other thoughts on the topic as well.
So I'll go to Tony next. I mean, Tony, you talked earlier thematically around this topic. So I think people say we're not racist. So let's, no one's going to say I'm a racist, but this, you said, Jessica, this is about, you're an individual. People are individuals. So
Right.
let's talk about how to be color brave.
So Sabina, that's you're absolutely right. So Color Brave says that I go beyond, and this is what Jessica said, I go beyond just saying I'm not a racist. I go beyond saying that I'm colorblind, but I actually get to know that person. I get to know, how they feel about certain things. See, what we do sometimes, all of us, we gloss over this race issue. It's uncomfortable. It bogs us down because it's a process. It takes time. Jessica said it's a movement, not a moment. And so it's not a checkbox. You just said, okay, I'm not a racist. I checked that off, and now let me move on. It's actually being willing to have uncomfortable, candid conversations with one another through a lens that says, I really want to understand your perspective. I really want to understand your experience so that we can make our workplaces better for everybody. And we can, get the kind of productivity and other workplace benchmarks that we've set for our company. We can actually reach those and not have this unspoken barrier there. And so if I talk about, a personal experience, I was the first African-American woman hired by Merrill Lynch back in the 70s. Can you all imagine, right? So there had been a discrimination suit, and as a result, they had to diversify their hiring. And so the fact that I was hired did not negate the culture of an organization. And so we can have, and there were well-intentioned people there. So it's not about that particular company. This happens across the board. People are well-intentioned, but it's almost like walking on eggshells. You know it's there, but nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to own it. Nobody wants to fix it, right? And when I say nobody, I'm not just talking about the people that hire you. I'm talking about you as an employee, as a person who's been hired, right? Because you already know that you're different in that space.
Yes.
Right? You already know that you're under a microscope. You already know that, people are looking at you and asking, and wondering all kinds of things that they're not used to seeing you in this space. And so I don't want to begin to tell you ladies some of the questions that people asked me, which were really, really strange, but it was it was uncomfortable. But to be color brave means that I'm brave enough to own it and in the corporate culture and structure provide space, not just space that people are talking about it outside of the workplace, not space that people are talking about it behind closed doors, but is there space to talk about it in a way that we're actually hearing one another. As I said from the outset, I don't think anybody starts off and says and raises their hand and says, you know what, I'm a racist. Most of us would say, I'm not. We say I'm colorblind, but can I be color brave and actually find out how you feel, who you are, what your experiences have been, why you think the way you think? Because sometimes we just assume somebody thinks a certain way, and that's not how they think at all. But if the workplace does not support something differently, then we all will, just resort back or fall back on what we believe. And then people leave, and you don't really know why they leave. They give you some kind of reason why they left the organization, but it's not really the reason that they left.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. Tony, thank you. I think I'm going to turn this over to Delinda next, and then we'll go to Nettie.
Sure. So color brave from my perspective. So I definitely echo both Tony and Jessica's perspective. So what I'll try to add to the conversation is here, when we think of the word brave, I think we make space for allyship, right? We make space for sort of all colors, all different walks of life, to say, you know what, I'm going to align myself to, no, I didn't walk in your shoes, but I respect the fact that you had a different experience. And when I see behavior that is contradictory to all of us sort of being working together, I call it out. So whether I am a white male in a group of white males and there's some conversation that really is not healing, helpful, or healthy, just call the behavior out and have that discussion in that group. So I think from a color brave perspective, I do think it's important for us to be able to say, hey, we want all the allies to be able to be okay with, hey, that just didn't feel right. I don't know why, but it didn't. So let's not, have that discussion. Or maybe all of us should be educated, because I just don't know if that's true or accurate. So, we can all be heroes and sheroes in this space just by, hey, this behavior is not welcoming, period. Now, let's figure out how we can improve our environment. So for me, color brave is very important. I think nowadays, when we have so many, I just watch all the protests across the world, and I just appreciate the fact that everyone is leaning in and understanding. So for me, that's the bravery in it. And I think as we bring it into our schools, our court systems, our companies, our police departments, I just think that we really, really will be able to have sustainable culture change around the world as it relates to us just being brave enough to call behavior out and hold folks accountable.
I completely agree with you, Delinda. I think there are two levels to being color brave. One is understanding where you personally are in this diversity and inclusion and acceptance movement, right? And identifying what are those blind spots that we each have. And regardless of whether a business leader, community leader, a diversity and inclusion leader, we all have those blind spots. And so part of it is being brave enough ourselves to acknowledge where we have those gaps and our skill sets and our knowledge base of how to interact with other individuals, and then seek to understand how we can become those advocates. So the next level for me is the brave part is about how do we then begin to step into and create the allyship or challenge others' perspectives in order to make sure we're creating a foundation of common respect and discussion, as well as advocacy, so that when we see microaggressions or when we see behavior that are not welcoming or are not the type of behaviors that align with the values of our corporation or our community organization or our personal values, that we call that out and help others to also seek and understand where they are in their journey so that we can help them cross over that bridge as well, so that we can be a better community, a better business leader, et cetera.
Nettie, thank you very much. So we're going to go to the final question, and I'm going to turn this over to Tony and Delinda. And I think we're running up against our end of our meeting here, and I want to get this back to Rhonda. So in a recent national survey by the Center for Talent Innovation, the findings showed that Black employees are 30% more likely to leave their company in less than 3 years than their white counterparts. What do you believe is the one thing a company must do, the one thing they must do to retain Black employees? So I'll go to Delinda first and then over to Tony.
Great, thank you. Great question. So first, think about that, those statistics. 30%. So a 30%, almost a third of your workforce is going to leave. If any business leader was losing a third of their business, it would be alarm bells ringing. We would have, numerous sessions, sort of really to all hands on deck to figure out what is going on. And I say that because I think sometimes we just think it's okay or it's someone else's issue or problem, and it's really not. And they need to think about it from a business perspective. In that way, you're potentially losing a third of your business in the next 3 years, and that's not okay. So I think two specific things that businesses should do. One is to create multiple levels of leadership engagement for employees, right? So sometimes when you leave an organization, you leave a team or your manager. And if that manager-employee relationship sort of isn't just right, it's important for frontline staff, other leaders to have other avenues, other mentors, other access to other leaders to be able to provide feedback, to also understand if they're doing a good job or not. So creating those multiple layers and levels of leadership engagement with staff, I think, is important. The second thing is, we have to provide advancement opportunities for our high performers. A lot of times we hire people for a job and they get stagnant. We don't say good job. We don't necessarily come in and give them recognition for the hard work, nor do we give them stretch projects, stretch assignments to make sure that we're continuously and reinvesting in our high performers. So it's very important that you provide advancement opportunities for those high performing individuals within the organization. And once you start doing that and having those conversations with your high performing employees and providing those opportunities, providing that feedback, you'll see, okay, wow, so my company is investing in me. I got this assignment, I've got this plum assignment, and this particular executive pointed me out in a conversation. So when you have those kind of connective and you start connecting those experiences, the likelihood that individuals are going to leave your organization will significantly decrease from a relationship standpoint.
Delinda, thank you. It's actions speak louder than words, is what I heard.
Absolutely.
So Tony, if you can bring us home.
So Delinda, you were reading off of my my paper, so you said some things that I that I was going to say. But Sabina, you asked for one thing. I think the first thing that all of us as business leaders need to do is to make sure we have clear policies and for onboarding and advancement even before the person is recruited and hired, and that it is equitable across the board, recognizing that people's performances may be different, but our policies are equitable. And so regardless of whether or not I know Jessica and Jessica referred me for this position and we hang out together, regardless of that, there's a level playing field coming in the door that the company is already predetermined that that's how they operate, or that, so that too often it becomes subjective in some places. Yeah. But if there is, it's clear so that a person does not have to guess how they climb if they're doing what they're supposed to do. They know what the path is, and the company is intentional about it. And they are, to use the word we talked about before, it's a color brave conversation that the company does that work in advance of even recruiting someone, and so that it's not it's not guesswork. People know what that next step is. It's not as rigid as the government. The government has these steps that people go through. I'm not suggesting something like that, but I'm just saying that the company itself has the plans to do that. So I think many companies do, but I'm not sure all do.
Yeah, Tony, thank you. That's a lot of, you're talking about transparency, and I really think that's a valid point. So I'm going to say thank you all for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. I've learned so much, and I hope that everyone listening has gotten something from the discussion, and because it's going to take each and every one of us to keep asking the questions and helping to make this conversation one of the past. And so now we'll bring Rhonda back for one last question. Rhonda.
Thank you all for an incredible conversation. I know that I got a lot out of it. I'm sure that our attendees will get a lot of it. I just want to ask one thing, and that is, if you're listening, I'm an attendee, what advice do you have for what I do when I get back? What do you have for what I do when I return to my office, when I'm on my next Zoom call with my leadership to get change? So anybody want to take that question up? I'll just throw it out there, and whoever wants to answer that, so that, you're all in great leadership roles, but even if I'm not in a leadership role, what can I be doing?
I'll go. I would recommend definitely reaching out to your D&I office, because we have tons of resources to help raise awareness and educate individuals about where they are in their own journey, but also how can they have an impact in their community. So I'd say reach out to your D&I leader if you have a D&I leader.
So for me, Rhonda, great question. From my perspective, I think it's important to actually engage frontline staff, engage your employees, have that conversation. So to your point, if you're an individual contributor listening to this conversation, talk to some of your colleagues about what's going on, what can they impact in their space, whether they work in a hospital or they work in a school, or whether they're a small business that makes, makes, danishes, right? I think it's important to have the conversation as peers, as colleagues, and then have those conversations with management, with supervisors, to talk about the current environment that they're working in, and always make sure you have suggestions on how to improve that environment. So I think sometimes we think that management has all the answers, and I'm here to tell you, as being in HR for over 20 years, management, we don't have all the answers, and we want to make sure that we listen to our frontline staff. So have that conversation, and then make recommendations to leaders.
Yeah, and I can go next. And I was going to say, similar to what Delinda said, is start the conversation. You can start the conversation with a group of your coworkers, with a group of your leaders, and really starting to think about what can be brought into the organization to move this work forward. And I know one of the other panelists talked about the journey that we're all on individually in this space. So maybe not going back and thinking about what your organization can do, but what can you personally do to continue to educate yourself around racial equity and social justice? And can you make incremental changes even in your personal life that will be for the betterment of the good of your organization and, you know, the community as a whole?
Okay, so I think I want to give advice, Rhonda, to the leaders who are watching, those who are in positions to make a difference, to ask you to consider taking this information and other information back if you don't have it already. It's great if you're in an organization that has competent HR professionals like some of these that are on the panel. Every organization may not, but just as leaders, how are we thinking and what's our policy? Leaders set direction for the companies. What do our boardrooms look like? Are we talking to ourselves? Are we just talking to people that think like us and look like us, or have we expanded it in a way? And so I think I would want to give that advice to those who are in decision-making positions to take this information back and think about our own, company policies and where we go from here.
All right, I think that we have left our attendees with a challenge, and I hope you all take advantage of that so that we actually go back with an action plan. I want to thank you all for the incredible conversation. I want to thank you, Sabina, and Bank of America for leading this discussion. I cannot wait until this is basically passe and we're like, why are we talking about this? So I look forward to that day, but until then, as you all have pointed out, we have work to do. And I just want to say, Jessica, what you said about inspecting what we expect resonates so well with me, because that's really how we hold ourselves accountable. So thank you once again for this great conversation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. We look forward to the work. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Thank